what's the human terrain like? What are the people like? Why do people do a certain thing? And when you're in a country that's not your own or that you're new to, okay, so you have to do certain things to not offend people because the way that you live your life is not necessarily how business is done.
Welcome to the Craft Podcast. I am John, and I am here with my co-host, lovely co-host, Veronica.
Thank you, doubly for the lovely compliments, John. So today we are very excited to be talking craft with our guest, Derek Kenmotsu. Welcome, Derek.
Thank you very much, Veronica. Thanks for having me.
So you are so very welcome. The pleasure is ours. Derek is a US Army Green Beret and a startup founder who's currently working as a program manager on Apple's core tech ops team. And Derek, since we're going to be talking a little bit about craft today, why don't we kick it off by asking, what would you say is your craft?
So I would say that my craft is leadership. And I know it's kind of audacious to say my craft is leadership because leadership is, across so many different things and there's so many ideas of what leadership is. But when I look at really my life and kind of the thread line across from when I was in high school all the way through my military experience to entrepreneurship and now in big tech, it's really been leadership, and it's been kind of honing that craft. And there's various different skills that have been required all throughout, but that is the one. And it's kind of hard always to specify, okay, what exactly is good leadership and how it does one be a good leader, because there's so many different environments that leadership is key. And also it's hard to say, put a finger on things because it's a soft skill versus a hard skill where, there's certain things that, whether you're a marketer or whether you're in finance, there's certain things that, the best of the best do. But for leadership, there's a lot of different, it's more of an art and on top of the science. So, yeah.
No, amazing. Well, you've touched on it a little bit there because you're sort of tracking leadership as a through line through your life, but maybe you can talk a little bit more about what your career journey has been in a nutshell before we dig in more on leadership philosophy.
Yes, absolutely. So I did my undergrad at West Point, and that's, United States Military Academy, and focuses primarily on developing leaders for the United States Army. And after I graduated, I studied international relations, and I focused on that because it was right after 9/11, and I knew that we were going to be deploying all around the world. And I've always had just a keen interest of world affairs. So I graduated with a bachelor's in IR, and then became an infantry officer, is where I met John in Korea, in the beautiful country of Korea. We were infantry platoon leaders together, training and getting ready in case someone crossed the DMZ. So we were standing ready, and ever since I've known John for now at like close to 14 years now. I was an infantry officer, and then I decided to become a Army Special Forces officer, also known as a Green Beret. And I think that's really defined both my career and my life, just because it was just such an immersive training experience, and also experience professionally on what we did. So I focused in the Pacific region, and I've done a lot of my work in Asia, from being in Korea, and then again stationed in Japan when I was a Green Beret, and doing missions from South Asian Nepal to the Philippines and everywhere in between. So I did that for about 4 years as a Green Beret. I led a team of 11 soldiers, advising some of our allies on various missions. And then I made the hard decision to leave active duty to go to business school. So I attended UC Berkeley to get my MBA. And during that time is when I got exposed to tech, and I did my internship at Apple in program management. And I got hired full time, and I was at the time owning the iPhone iPhone leather cases. And then I decided to make a complete change in my trajectory of career, I decided to quit my job and move to Hanoi, Vietnam to start an education company, and which sounds kind of crazy. But then if you look back what I did as a Green Beret, it was advising special operations soldiers from the Philippines and various Southeast Asian and South Asian countries. So it kind of felt a little bit like that, but instead of warriors that would trudge through the jungles, looking for, enemies of their country, it was advising middle managers on how best to build innovative teams. So very similar, right?
Yeah.
But no, I think what the key difference is, key similarity, sorry, is that, it was advising and leading cross-culturally. So that's, I think, where my experience through the military and living overseas and really getting an understanding of, how people live and trying to expand. And I'm constantly learning. I'm always surprised, but that was something that I brought to that startup experience. So that company is called Team Ignite. It was a corporate training company, and it did that for a couple of years. And at the height of the pandemic, or right before the pandemic, my wife got pregnant, and we had our first child in Canada. So I left Vietnam, where my wife and I decided to have our first child, and that's when COVID locked down borders. So we could even talk about COVID and managing and leading through COVID, a startup remotely from Canada, Vietnam. But ultimately, we worked on it for about 4 months, and I decided to ultimately leave the company and find a job closer to home. And it just happened to be back at Apple. That wasn't the original plan. Not on the same team as I was before, but feel very grateful to have this opportunity to be closer to family back in California. I'm a California native, born and raised in Silicon Valley, San Mateo, California. So now I'm back there, and I've been back at Apple this time for a little over 6 months. So that's kind of been my journey so far.
There's so much to talk about. Where do we start? So the first thing I want to talk about is, I think our generation, or the world we live in, you're not just like an employee, right? A lot of people are, they have to be a leader, a manager, and a producer. So the way I see this is, those are all just skills and craft people need. When you go interview for jobs, generally speaking, people are mainly hitting you up on the producer part, which is mainly like, the discipline we all know about: marketing, product management, operations, etc. And I think the beauty of folks who've started off in their careers in the military is they kind of over-indexed on leadership, potentially management as well, and you'll kind of get to use that a little bit later in your career, but at least you have it. So anyways, I just found that to be super interesting, because there's just so much we have to do now. Like, it's not just, hey, do your job. It's like, hey, do your job, be a leader. And in the corporate world, leading is kind of leading a vision, leading a project without having people directly report to you. And then the management aspect as well. I feel like there's and I'll ask you questions later on, just managing, first of all, just like soldiers, like infantry soldiers, versus highly like professionals like Green Berets. I think probably managing Green Berets would be more similar than or very similar to like corporate folks, because they're highly skilled, but a little bit different as well. But anyways, just want to start off with that. I think it's cool that, this is a framework I'm thinking about everything. And okay, now honing onto leadership, which is, this is our first podcast where we're focused on essentially a soft skill. Since I was in the military as well, I'm a little bit biased, but some people say there's no greater factory to produce leaders than the US military specifically. And then even diving down even deeper, West Point or US Military Academy. You've been there, obviously, and you've done a lot of different leadership things. Why do you think, what's so special about West Point or the Army?
Yeah, so I to give a plug to West Point specifically. So there's multiple service academies. There's the Air Force, Navy, Coast Guard, and they all produce great leaders. But what sets West Point apart is how they develop people from being followers first and really learning how to follow, and then immediately right after, you're responsible 1 year in, you're responsible for one or two new students, and so it's a very, very regimented leadership development process. Whereas at the other service academies, oftentimes you might be 3 or 4 years in before you start leading and developing. So it's really baked in early to go from following and really understanding what it means to be a good follower and supporting your leaders, to then becoming what the level is a team leader responsible for just one or two individuals and their whole development. The mentorship and everything is really on that individual on creating the plan. So there's no, sure, there's plenty of leadership books out there and we do leadership courses, but that plan of mentorship is really your own, and you make it your own, and you try to figure out what is my personal leadership philosophy. And John, I don't know if you remember, you go to a unit and sometimes there is, sometimes there is not. A commander would have his his or her command philosophy or leadership philosophy, and that's usually developed over multiple years of experience, either successes or failures, or watching others succeed or fail. So over the years, I've developed my leadership philosophy of watching individuals, and mostly good. And I feel fortunate that it was mostly good examples, but there are plenty of bad examples too. But I think that's one thing that sets West Point aside, is that it's really about people. I told you this earlier, you go to the different academies, they're all about history and they put monuments everywhere. In Air Force, you have airplanes, and in the Naval Academy, you have ships and maybe some aircraft. But then at West Point, it's all statues of former presidents and generals and the people that have made, the institution what it is and developed that whole leadership development program.
Awesome.
Well, John was alluding to this a little bit before. When you think about being a leader, you could be talking about thought leadership, you could be talking about leading a project, but then of course there's leading people. And it seems like leading people is very core to how you think about leadership, Derek.
Right.
I wonder if how you would describe your own leadership style and that philosophy that you've developed.
Right. So I think in the forefront of my leadership style is to lead with empathy. I think through my experience, I've led people that have, gone through multiple different experiences and challenges. And what has helped me ensure that I was giving them the best possible guidance was really trying to understand what they were going through before jumping to conclusions about labeling people based on my initial snap judgments. So I think leading with empathy is very important to really understand how to motivate and how to guide the people that you're leading, whether that's in an official capacity, someone reporting to you, or you're tasked to influence a cross-functional team, someone that you're not necessarily in charge of, just understanding and trying to understand what they're going through. So that's number one. And then number two is to have self-awareness. So to identify those strengths and weaknesses, and then take feedback seriously and ask for feedback, and not just from your leaders, but also from your peers and those that you're leading.
I have a funny story about that. So, when we were in the military, we didn't have things like 360 feedback. I don't think we did. It was mainly just like your commander or your superior giving you an evaluation.
Yeah.
And then when I joined Riot Games, they were into that because they were kind of on the forefront of like HR and like management, all that, and leadership or theories, or trying to apply it to their company. And we went through this exercise, and I thought it'd be fun to get a few people from my time in the military to give me like 360 feedback, because I was only like a couple years out at the time, and I was just kind of curious. And I asked this one, I remember one person, the person who gave me the worst score I was surprised. It was this guy who reported to me. He was like a first lieutenant when I was a captain. And he joined our deployment like late.
Okay.
And when I saw the feedback, I'm like, holy shit, I didn't know like you hated me. Like I thought we were good. Like it wasn't just like, oh yeah, you could improve on 1, 2, 3. It was just like, you were a fucking dick, dude. And I'm like, whoa,
Oh, wow.
whoa. And I'm like, well, hey, tell me why. He's like, oh, because he said I came. He's like, I'm like a brand new. I'm like a brand new first lieutenant. I just it's my first deployment. I came in and you didn't like coach me or give me even like a week to get set up. He's like, you just threw like 10 manuals in front of me and told me to like start delivering results. And I'm like, that is how I was. I was just so binary. I was just so hardcore, like, oh, like, hey, new guy, just like, throw your, drink from the fire hose and put your feet in the fire kind of thing. And I'm like, wow, like that's how I was perceived as a leader by him. And then on the other hand, I had another person gave me complete different feedback. So I think I was not, I didn't think about command philosophy. As you say, I didn't have like a standard like leadership product I was offering to people. I think I was more of just, oh, this is a person I liked or have worked with a lot. This is how I treat them. But that was it opened up my eyes because my then manager saw it. I said to him, he's like, wow, this is a great learning experience because
Yeah.
just getting the feedback, right? Like it cost me nothing to ask him, and I learned a lot,
Right.
even 4 years later. But
Yeah.
let's talk about that. So you talk about empathy, which clearly that was my triggering point for myself. What other leadership frameworks have you seen or that resonate with you?
Okay. So there's a few, and one that I think really resonates with me is I get it from True North by Bill George, Authentic Leadership. So I think it's really a values-based, framework. So that's really kind of bringing your full self to it and really understanding what are the values beyond just simple like the basic needs of either making money or getting promotions, but like what really matters to you in life. And I think that book is what really resonates with me. And I was really reading that around the time I was starting Team Ignite, to really drive what I wanted to instruct and what I wanted my curriculum to be centered around. So authentic leadership is one of the main ones that I try to go back to, and I try to live my life. And I'm far from perfect, but I try to use that as kind of like a guiding, like my North Star, if you will. But so that's one. The other one is one that I constantly use wherever I go, and it's the first rule of the soft special operation forces imperatives, and that's understand the operational environment, or just really understand your environment. They call it operational environment because it's military, and everything's operational, and everything is the field. But what that means is like understand where you are in terms of the culture, usage of language, your official leaders of power brokers. So, when you join a new company, a new team, a new organization, that's always relevant. How do people respond and react? And I think by initially kind of just putting your head to the ground and observing and trying to really understand the dynamics and the culture of your organization will really help you benefit in the way of navigating and then eventually becoming more influential in that environment. And so like when we go back to like the military side, that means like, okay, what is your terrain like? So that's like the physical, but then also what's the human terrain like? What are the people like? Why do people do a certain thing? And when you're in a country that's not your own or that you're new to, okay, so you have to do certain things to not offend people, because the way that you live your life is not necessarily how business is done. So I think that's where it's really key, and that's where at least special operators, especially Green Berets, need to really understand that culture in order to build rapport. And that's a whole another topic that I know that we can talk about. And I guess the main thing about leadership is also building relationships and rapport.
Well, and I guess, you and John have both alluded to this. John, you're joking that, earlier in your life, you had a very different leadership style and you were throwing manuals at people and expecting them to deliver results. Derek, I'm sure you're a different kind of leader today than you were back in high school.
Right.
How do you better your craft? How do you try and improve as a leader every day?
Yeah, so I think Better in the craft. So I would say that, so there's like the things I've talked about, like being caring and empathetic, and then honing the craft. I think it's really improving, upping your game and your skills. So depending on where you are in your job, there's probably certain skills that could either make you more effective, more influential, or faster at doing and influencing. So I think the competence part is how you become like, from maybe like you're a good leader on a person to person basis, but to really become an influential like thought leader and visionary, I think it's really going deeper, and whether that's, taking courses or getting additional credentials. I think it's just how do you hone the additional skills on top of things that that are common to most leaders, such as communicating better, improving your, being clear and concise with your communication, both written and verbal, and also just connecting and building rapport. Yeah, so I would say that it's the competency piece on top of just the person to person leader development.
Let's talk about Vietnam as an example,
Yeah.
because I feel like it's just like a culture I don't really understand that well. It's generally like, oh, it's in Asia. So I automatically trying to assign like, oh, what are typical Asian culture and values? So
Yeah.
a couple of things I have, a couple questions. First is, what do you think about Vietnam as a market? I'm personally super excited about it. I think it's like the next China almost. And then second, what are some like insights about Vietnamese business culture? Like how do leaders lead there? I have no idea.
Yes. Okay. So let's talk the first one. Vietnam as a country and a market. Very exciting. Southeast Asia as a whole is very exciting for a few reasons. One, demographics. It's a very young country, a young region, and specifically young country. It's one of the youngest countries, I think, just next to Cambodia. It's like that's maybe the only other country that's younger than Vietnam. So over half the population is under 35. So you have like a country that's quickly developing, that's very connected. The amount of people that have connectivity to cell phones is extremely high. And usage of things like social media is very high adopting. So there's a lot of factors where that is key. And also education is really a big priority. So if you look at a lot of the, I guess like the tigers you call it, like, Korea, which came out of like the middle income trap, and obviously China is extremely puts a lot of emphasis on education. Vietnam is right there, and that's why we chose Vietnam as a market to enter in Southeast Asia. So I think those factors with education, there's manufacturing is all kind of a lot shifted, has shifted from China to Vietnam, and just the education has been improving. There's still a lot of progress that they need to make, but the trend is in a pretty fast growing direction. Now to talk about the business culture. When I look at a lot of the companies we work with, there's a lot of still state-sponsored companies. So we worked with Viettel, which is like the Verizon or like the largest telco in Vietnam, and they're actually run by the Vietnamese army. So like we're going to train, and like they're in their like dress uniform, like imagine going to like class A's, like that's normal. And then that's like, yeah, so like the CEO, I think, is like also a general or something. It's yeah, so it's
Wow.
different than we're used to in the US. We don't have like state sponsored companies. So if you can imagine, it's very regimented, very like military structure like, and the decisions are very like top down. So like everyone is waiting for that director to say yes. So you just need to like really convince that director. But if he doesn't, like, and also what's challenging is if your point of contact is not the director, there's so many layers of like, I don't want to get in trouble. Like, I don't think that they want to see this. There's a lot of assumptions. There's not like, hey, let's just float this idea, fail fast. Like, no, you don't want to fail fast. We don't want to fail at all because I might lose my job type of thing. So that is a consideration in some of the older companies, that like some of the conglomerate companies. But I would say that Vin Group is the largest private company. in Vietnam. And I think they're trying to be a little bit more robust on the middle management and train their lower managers to be more decision makers. So I think there's a trend to move in that direction. And I think the younger companies are trying to get there. And there is an appetite to, one, get into the global value chain, whether that's through manufacturing or other ways, but also to learn from international perspectives. And that's why we were getting these contracts, because we had that international perspective. So I think it will take time. It will probably be generational. But it's very, common to East Asian companies to be very top-down driven. In the basically you're based at the lower levels, you're expected to be told what to do. And also you better do it too. Like there's no like, hey, I think this is a better way and this is why. Yeah, so it's very top down. And I think that's like a challenge that they have to work through to become a more flatter, innovative organization across multiple companies. Yeah, I'm not sure if you worked with like a Samsung or any of the Korean companies, but there's a lot of Korean companies that have large presence in Vietnam. So I think a lot of direction comes from that, like these chaebols, the
I
large
see.
conglomerates. So it's similar. A lot of that is being adopted as well.
I haven't directly. I've just heard about it because I know Samsung specifically, they hire a lot of MBAs. They have something like a global strategy group.
GSG, yep.
GSG. So everyone, I knew a lot of friends who worked for GSG, and I mean, it was a sweet gig. They pay for you.
Yeah.
And they give you I think they maybe give you like an apartment in like Yongsan, and
Yep.
they give you like Korean lessons.
Yes.
I mean, that's awesome. But the flip side I heard from my people from people I know who work there is that even if it's a strategy group, you're really just doing what the boss tells you what the strategy is. You're just filling in the numbers. You're not like really coming up with something new. Right. No offense to the GBGers out there, or GSGs.
GSG, yeah.
GSG,
I know that's kind of, it's hard because it's hard to break that culture. Culture is so hard to break, and since it is a structured culture, they brought this. It's a great idea. I mean, to bring people from international, like not from Korea, to bring these innovative ideas. But then if you don't want to if you want to control how they think, then, or what their work streams are, then that's going to be a challenge.
Well, John, you're asking Derek to talk a bit about Vietnam to kind of get at leadership and drawing from his past experience. Derek, I wonder, if we were to ask you what were your most rewarding leadership experiences or most challenging leadership experiences, maybe those two things are one and the same. If there's any anecdote or story that sort of bubbles to the surface for you, if not, no worries. We have other questions in the hopper.
So the most rewarding experience, and I think this is maybe like one of those like glory day stories, but it was, I think the best job that I will ever have had was being a special forces team leader. A team of 11 soldiers, and actually younger for like a team of Green Berets. But what that meant is they were, one, motivated, and also just so hungry to learn, and really didn't have any bad habits. So I think we had some like, growing pains in the beginning. Like our first mission was in Nepal, and there were some hiccups with, certain things that were forgotten or, not thought of. But then we did a mission right afterwards in the Philippines, and it was just one of the most like productive missions we ever had. And we were able to really capture that for our command. And it's weird because it's military, but at the same time, we're still kind of like marketing our team and what our productivity is. So I think that whole experience of seeing our team come together and overcome these challenges, is kind of like young soldier like mistakes, but to overcome and really hone their skills to deliver in a big way, was really rewarding. Then that was in the beginning part of my team leadership. But then by the end of it, 3 years later, when I was leaving the team, it was really sad because it was just one of those things that just inevitably happens. Is always going to be churn, that you have to leave the job for a newer person to get that leadership experience. So that was my most rewarding. I think my most challenging was, we haven't talked about this, but I was my MBA program's student body president. And I had a board of almost the same size, 12 VPs, which had different responsibilities, but to lead and guide professionals, who are very accomplished in their own right, who are not getting paid, they're volunteering, and to do basically hold together and drive all the student activities. That was a challenge, because one, it was new to me to lead basically kind of like a nonprofit board, and with individuals that they all got elected into their position, but also needed me to give the vision and motivate them. That was really challenging, and I think it was just challenging, one, because it was new to me, and two, because not that they were challenging personalities, but everyone was just so accomplished that they expected a lot of me. They would hold me accountable if I was not delivering thorough, great guidance, and if they didn't agree with how I was doing, they would let me know. And that was challenging, and that was tough. But at the same time, I think that peer leadership, that's really usually the most challenging, but also just really a valuable experience in developing how you lead, because you're on the same level. So you have to use multiple different ways to influence, guide, and support the team. Yeah.
Absolutely. One kind of challenge to working with people who are unmolded and totally green,
Right.
because you're forming them
Right.
from the beginning, and another kind of challenge with people who are going to ask you what's up,
Exactly.
and hold you accountable.
Right.
What you mentioned earlier, you were talking about how working with people who didn't have any bad habits yet,
Mm-hmm.
and or people who are making early mistakes and have mistakes that they need to overcome, or particular growth areas. I wonder, for you, were there any kind of bad habits that you had to overcome, or teach yourself, undo?
Let's see. I think, okay, so I guess this could be applied. I'm trying to think of, so going back to like the military thing, but this could be applied to any job that might be a little bit like process focused. So our planning process, there's steps that we take and we're supposed to take. And I think it's easy to check the block on some things where you don't see that as like a high priority. So in some of our planning processes in the military, there could be some corners cut where you're not planning for certain contingencies. But I'm trying to think of, unfortunately, I have some good success stories, but where we did plan for contingencies, but I'm trying to think of when I like really like dropped it. Oh geez.
No, it's all
I,
good. You can be perfect. You can
I am
have
not, I'm far
no
from
bad
perfect.
habits. No,
Geez. But I would say that that's
I'm
the thing, is like cutting corners on processes that you've done like 100 times. So that's one thing that to try to avoid. And it's tempting when either it's been 9 times out of 10 haven't had to worry about it. But yeah.
Okay.
No, keep
Yeah.
thinking on that one. We're on a fishing expedition. We're just
Right.
throwing out questions all over the place. No worries.
What are some common misconceptions you've seen that people have about leadership? And then also specifically, maybe about you as a former leader in the Army.
Hmm.
Yeah, I think they're actually kind of similar. So I think most people have an idea of what leadership should be, and that's oftentimes like a very vocal, loud leadership. Oftentimes someone that's very extroverted, that leans towards being very verbose and full of words, full of stories. But I think that doesn't necessarily have to be the case. I think it's great if it is, and if you can use that effectively, it's great. But I would say that I am not usually the one that's the loudest in the room. And I would say, I wouldn't say that I'm an introvert. I mean, I grew up when I was young, I was quite quiet. So I would say I shifted from introvert to extrovert when I was around high school age. But I would say that one misconception is that you need to be extroverted. You need to always turn it on. But I don't think that's necessarily the case. Sure, you need to be able to communicate and get your point across. but I think that everyone can find their own leadership, I guess, skill, like leadership style, and hone those skills, and make your voice not just loud, but mostly influential. So I think that's my thought is, that's the misconception, that you need to be like a loud leader. And then for myself, I would say that my leadership style is usually participative. So really to understand the team that I'm leading, and really to get their feedback. And of course, there's a time and place for snap judgments, and to be more of an authoritarian leader, especially in times of crisis where decisions need to be made quickly. But I think, getting buy-in from the team is very important. And that's often what I did with the teams I have led, whether it was in the Army, or in student government, or even now, I lead cross-functionally. I mean, I do need to get their input from the technical teams, but yeah, I think it's very important in my style to get that buy-in from the team in communication, and being very transparent about what I know, what I don't know. Yeah.
Coalition builder, seeking opinions from all
Yes.
around. Well, it's clear leadership has been this through line in your career, from student government to the military and to big tech. And I wonder, where do you want to go next in your career, or what informs the different career choices that you make?
That's a good question. So I've thought about multiple different, just because I've had many pivots. I feel like my career has not been linear. I think many people's careers are not linear, but mine definitely has not been linear. So I feel like I could land in multiple different areas, but what I do value and what I do want to do is to help people. And that's why I joined the military in the first place. John joined the military around the same time I did, but that was really the right after 9/11, and there was a lot of uncertainty in the world, and people were concerned about what was going to be the future, and safety of our country. So that's why I wanted to serve during that time. And I stayed in the reserves, inactive, for 5 years, but just activated into the reserves this year, to join a readiness division, which covers the US Army readiness of the Southwestern United States. So I'm in a team that is in charge of kind of ensuring the readiness across that whole region. So that's something that I just started. It's almost like a side hustle, US Army side hustle. So that's one thing I've done, going back to service, and maybe continuing on in different areas of a government service, possibly. And if I decide to change companies, it would be in a company that has, I think, a product that I believe in, that helps people. I think that's one thing that I probably won't work for Philip Morris. I probably won't want to be in big tobacco or anything, but something along the lines of trying to add value to people's lives. And I saw that Apple does, is a huge company, but I feel like Apple tries to do right by their customers, and that's what I like about the company.
One
No, it's ultimately a higher purpose than career.
Yeah.
It's about contributing to society. It's beautiful.
Thank
Sorry,
you.
John. Go
No, I
ahead.
was gonna say, before I ask you my last question, one comment, and you don't have one comment where you don't have to answer, or you don't have to say anything about it. A no comment from you is fine. Is I've always been interested in politics, and I think obviously you are certainly adept at it. If history is a good indication of the future, but I think the reason why I think you'd be better than me at it is because I think you would truly do that job or that career for all the right reasons. Whereas I think part of me wants to do it because it's cool, or like I just think it's interesting.
Yeah.
I think there's probably lots of like the daily grind of operations of being a politician is, the most boring part probably is like the fundraising A
Yeah.
congressman's got to like spend, I heard, like 7 hours a day just making calls to make money, raise money. Another part is, the quote unquote boring things to serve your constituents. It's not running around making speeches all day. I think that's maybe at like when you have a huge national profile. Anyways, I just thought, I've known this my whole life, or that I've known you, but just going through this conversation, I could see why, like, it makes sense. Like, there's really just like a through story, a narrative that just kind of like fits what you really believe in over your entire life. But anyways,
putting the service and being a civil servant. Also, when John Pan runs for office in the future, we'll be sure to play on loop the clip of him saying he's doing it because he thinks it's cool.
I thought about that, but he's being open, transparent, and honest, though. So
yeah, I'm gonna try to pull Trump. Anyways, next topic. Next topic is.
You're really getting a lot of sound bites here.
I am. But my last question is, this is the ultimate tough question, I think. How do you're a young parent? How do you balance work and life when work and life has so many different facets now?
Oh man, that is tough. And I mean, flashback 45 minutes ago, I was feeding my daughter, and then my wife is like, "What are you gonna do now?" I said, "I have a podcast with John." She knows John, by the way. So she's giving me like this dirty look, like, really, like, you can't just help me out a little bit more. So I'll be honest, it's hard, and it's something that I need to do better at. And I think a lot of us that, maybe young parents or those that have a ton of irons in the fire trying to do a lot of things, it's really hard. And I think I need to kind of reflect and figure out how do I better balance my time and set maybe a little bit more, I guess, guardrails around the time that I hold sacred for my family. So I think it's difficult, because you're trying to do a lot of things, whether it's thinking about running for office or a new career pivot or starting a new job, whatever it might be. There's so much that life throws at us. And my wife, actually, she said it right. She said, like, sometimes I feel like your life is pulling you in multiple directions and you're letting it drag you. And it's kind of like, it's very like graphic description, like, but she's right in that I need to do better at figuring out how do I take control and be thoughtful about that time. So, I think what I do now is try to set it. Also, challenge is that my work goes into the evenings, and that's kind of like prime time of spending time with the family. So I think as I am getting more, I guess, in tune with my current role, which is only 6 months in, I can set more times, like a good hour and a half, maybe 2 hours in the evening, the key times for like dinner and, bath time for my daughter, reading a story and putting her to bed. Yeah, those are like key times, like finding those key moments, whatever it is in your life, whether it's holding your workout time sacred or whether it's holding time for your loved ones sacred. I think it's really like setting it and committing to it. And I'd be the first one to admit that I have not been great at doing that. But I think that's one thing that, on some days I do, and it makes all the difference. Because if things at home are kind of in chaos, then everything else starts to snowball and become chaos, and it's much harder to concentrate. So finding balance is hard. I think just to accept that that's the fact, and then also that sometimes we have to let some things go. There's some things that maybe are less important than things like spending time with family, whether that's your partner, your children, or your parents or your siblings or somebody, whoever your closest loved ones are.
Awesome.
I think about this and I was struck when you were talking about learning your operational environment, or we're having a whole conversation where we're bringing so much sensitivity to the communication that we have with our coworkers and
Right.
our reports and self-awareness and bringing your best self. And
Right.
sometimes I have to check myself and realize, hey, I need to bring that same kind of emotional energy to
Right.
the people in my private space and my family
Right.
that I dedicate to everybody else around
Yeah.
me.
That's so
And I will
true.
just say thank you so much, Derek, then, for spending your precious evening time with us
Thank you
here
for
on
inviting
this
me. It's been a
podcast.
pleasure.